Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to your morning briefing for Tuesday, the 24th of June, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. We start today's show off with a quick admin note. I know this has been a long time coming, but all early morning members are going to get an email today from me with a quick update. We will start moving all members over to the new platform this week, kind of a soft grand opening. And then next week we'll be up and running full steam over on the new website. So keep an eye out for an email from us later this morning or maybe early afternoon. With that, good morning, Robert. Let's go ahead and jump into the domestic sit rep, starting with Supreme Court. Pretty good news for the Trump administration. So what, we're sending all these people to Sudan now?
Good morning, Mike. Apparently, and this was actually a 6-3 decision to prevent the Massachusetts District Court from blocking the Trump administration from sending illegal aliens to third countries. And the Solicitor General, the Trump Solicitor General, argued that in this case that they were basically only sending illegal immigrants whose country of origin would not accept them. And now the Supreme Court's saying that the Trump administration does not have to require a 10-day notice and then also a chance for these illegal immigrants to appeal their deportation based on arguments that they could be tortured or persecuted. And this was a reverse of a block on these third country deportations from the Massachusetts District Court. And this is a pretty strong decision by the Supreme Court on this case. And I think this is maybe a sign that the Supreme Court's more forcefully trying to tell these district courts to be a little bit more discerning with their injunctions against the Trump administration.
Well, we did see that federal district court judge rule that he issued some kind of injunction, which was against the Supreme Court ruling. Does that have any standing whatsoever?
The legal analysts I've seen cover it say that, basically it doesn't have any real effect, and the Trump administration is probably going to move forward as if that order didn't exist.
So this is a pretty clear sign that we can expect a ramp up of ICE operations, which, by the way, there's still something like maybe 5 cities where the Trump administration is planning on increasing these enforcement operations. So I'm sure we're going to see more protests and probably some direct action, very likely in some cities like Seattle and Portland. Portland is still at a low boil, by the way. We'll have a big update on that tomorrow in anticipation of these increased ramped up enforcement operations. All right, with that, and let's go ahead and cover the next item here. House passes this NGO terror funding. What is this exactly?
So this is HR 260. It's called the No Tax Dollars for Terrorists Act, and it's going to require the State Department to implement a strategy that the bill says to discourage foreign governments and NGOs from providing foreign assistance to the Taliban. I read through the text of the bill. It's also going to require the State Department to report on not only any foreign money going to the Taliban or the Haqqani network, but also any U.S. government contacts or U.S. government money going to these groups since September 2021. I did see a part where it's also going to require the State Department to put together a plan to relocate vetted, what they call Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghan nationals to the U.S. or a third country.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then, by the way, that Sean Ryan has been talking about that for a couple of years. We've been giving tens of millions of dollars to the Taliban every single week for years now. And it's good to see that is finally coming to an end. I wouldn't even say that's a win. We're just getting back to neutral. They're still the big winners in all this, at this point, it's got to be billions of dollars. Just in continued funding, which is amazing. All right, and then finally, let's wrap up here in New York. They're planning a new nuclear power plant, the first in decades, probably, right?
Yeah, at least 15 years. This is the first major new U.S. nuclear power project. And the New York Power Authority, they're planning to build this major nuclear reactor project in upstate New York. And this is a major turn from New York Governor Kathy Hochul. And she said that they must radically increase supply starting now, or New York's going to start seeing rolling blackouts within the next decade. And right now the plan is for at least 1 gigawatt of nuclear power capacity.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of running out of power, is that emergency alert that we covered yesterday? Is that still in effect for portions of the United States? Because I noticed there's what do they call it, a heat dome? We're going to have 100-degree temps across, at least heat index across most of the east half of the United States. Is that emergency still in effect?
I haven't seen PJM, which is the regional transmission organization that put that alert out. I haven't seen them rescind it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is for PJM covers basically from Maryland out to Ohio and parts of Illinois, all the way down to parts of South Carolina.
All right, thanks for that, Robert. And by the way, I do see some comments about Iran. We're obviously going to get there. Let's go ahead and move into the global sit rep. A few other items here to cover. Go ahead, Jared.
Will do. So China state broadcasters are espousing the Fujian carrier class's new swarm capability, which they say is a technological breakthrough that can reshape the power dynamics of the Indo-Pacific, their wording. Now, this is for launching manned fixed-wing aircraft, not drones, but they obviously took that for a reason. This is a propaganda campaign in order to scare the American public and also the Japanese, Australian, Taiwanese public away from opposing China. The swarm that they're talking about is just the ability to rapidly deploy aircraft, which all 11 of our aircraft carriers can do more efficiently and in greater numbers than what this single aircraft carrier can do.
Jared, and just real briefly, what's the difference between the number of aircraft that a Chinese carrier versus a U.S. carrier has?
Depends on the class. The Nimitz class, the one that we're phasing out, can carry, if they really need to, up to 130 FA-18s, and the Fujian aircraft carrier has an estimate of about 50.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, let's move on to Mexico.
Okay, so Mexico State Oil Company Pemex announced last month that it was falling short of its target output of 1.8 million barrels per day. Now, Mexico is still trying to increase its energy independence after the 2021 winter storm down there in Texas kind of disrupted U.S. gas imports. And the reason that's important for Mexico is they get the vast majority of their gas imports from the United States via Texas. Now, the Russian embassy, as of yesterday, reached out to Mexico offering to share liquid natural gas extraction technologies while also supplying Mexico with LNG. I don't think Mexico will take it, but the fact that this is being offered is essentially trying to drive a wedge between the United States and Mexico.
Sure. Or at least help Russia get a foothold. By the way, I think there was didn't the Russians, was it a military parade that either the Mexicans went to or the Russians went down to Mexico? Something like that. You're like a year or two ago. Kind of big news at the time. I don't recall the details at any rate.
I think it was Russian defense officials in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. All right, with that, let's go ahead and talk about this big Iran update. Still kind of in a will they, won't they ceasefire here, but let's start with this retaliation that we saw yesterday.
It was a very short retaliation. Iran fired at least 6 missiles. I haven't seen that updated to be higher. So 6 missiles at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar. There were reportedly 0 casualties. All missiles were intercepted, and Iran reportedly notified Qatar ahead of the strike. So, hey, evacuate. Here it comes. And now we have a ceasefire to talk about.
Yeah, potentially. Let's go ahead and get into this upcoming protest. We do have 68 today. That's a bit above baseline. And by the way, tomorrow we're going to do a big deep dive into these protests and see what's next after this big June 14th No Kings protest. There's been some talk about maybe a big July 4th event. We'll see. All right, with that, Robert and eventually Jared will bring him back on. But let's go ahead and get into this ceasefire. So Trump yesterday announced a big, beautiful ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And they had something like 6 hours to kind of wrap up the end of their ongoing operations. And then there was supposed to be no firing, and that has been violated. I guess Trump has accused both sides of violating the ceasefire already. So where are we?
Yeah. Yesterday, President Trump announced a ceasefire and what he called the Israel-Iran 12-day war, and said that the ceasefire had been fully agreed upon by both Israel and Iran. And then today, apparently there were strikes back and forth overnight, and President Trump has called on Israel to stop airstrikes against Iran, called it a major violation of the ceasefire. And I did see earlier this morning, the basically a press conference on his way to Marine One, and President Trump said that he expects the ceasefire to hold, and I think what's happening here is he's trying to pressure Israel to keep engaging in the ceasefire and avoid a conflict that could see the U.S. dragged into potentially a protracted conflict in the region. But the risk remains that either side doesn't hold to the ceasefire, and Israel moves forward with airstrikes against Iranian leadership. Because I've seen since basically October 7th, a lot of the Israeli political commentary is pointing to Benjamin Netanyahu having major incentives to keep these conflicts ongoing. And we have talked previously about Israeli officials who've openly signaled that Israel's end goal is regime change.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree that is the bigger risk. If you operate under the assumption after October 7th, I think Israel's just tired of mowing the grass, and that's why they went in and they cleared Gaza. And I don't see Netanyahu especially excited about the prospect of every 1 to 2 years or every 6 to 12 months having to bomb some new Iranian secret nuclear site. And I guess that's going to be part of the ongoing negotiations with the Trump administration, what Iran does with that, whether they continue trying to enrich that uranium. But my key assumption is just that Israel actually does want regime change in Iran. And so I'm a little hesitant to look at the ceasefire and say, well, let me say this. I'm not as optimistic as Trump appears to be about what's going to happen with the ceasefire. We'll see. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. All right. Thanks for that. And speaking of regime change in the Atlantic, there's a big story about this group of Iranian expats that are trying to overthrow the Ayatollah. What's the latest here, Jared?
Yes. So it's a combination of expats and Iranians still in Iran, some of them even in the military of Iran. Now, this is, like you said, from the Atlantic. They published an article. This is an Iranian journalist, so reasonable to assume that he would still have contacts back in Iran. He claims to be in contact with a group of Iranians working to overthrow the Ayatollah, and this was all prior to the strikes that the U.S. conducted. Now, this group is reportedly composed of businessmen, political and military figures, and relatives of high-ranking clerics. The clerics are important for the council that actually selects an Ayatollah. Now, this group claims that they will strike a deal with the United States to stop Israeli attacks on Iran if they can depose Khomeini and take power. The military officials also claim to have the backing of just a major Gulf country for changing Iran's direction. We can guess who that would be, but they didn't clarify. Now, the group also claims that, quote, Tehran is full of such plots, and everybody knows Khomeini's days are numbered, which would suggest that they're not the only one, but they may not be pulled in the same direction. The plotters additionally leave open the possibility of Khomeini remaining in the office, but just eliminating the power of the office of the Ayatollah.
Mm. All right. Well, that's interesting. And it's pretty clear that there's a lot more to come on Iran. This is not the end of it. We're going to be talking about Iran for a long time to come. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Let's move on here to this bill that's bill on special interest alien encounters. So just to recap, we talked about it yesterday, but just to recap here, special interest aliens are those designated by DHS to have a potential nexus, either a known or suspected affiliation with a foreign terrorist organization or some state sponsor of terror. All right, Robert, what are we looking at here in the House, and what does this mean?
Well, the House is considering what they're calling the Special Interest Alien Reporting Act of 2025. And this would require the Department of Homeland Security to report all contacts with special interest aliens to Congress every month as soon as the bill passes. And, I read through the bill, and the first report actually requires all contacts with special interest aliens to be reported from 20 January 2021 through 19 January 2025. I think that's significant because we only, as far as I could find, we only really know the number of special interest aliens that were encountered at the border, which was more than 70,000 between 2021 and 2023 because of a leaked CBP document. So I think it's likely the Biden DHS was not reporting to Congress the number of special interest aliens encountered. And I think more importantly, those that were released into the U.S. interior without additional scrutiny, which we only know about because of a DHS whistleblower in, I believe, early 2024.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Can you just go over that number again? How many special interest aliens were encountered under Biden?
For just from 2021 to August 2023 or October 2023 was, I think the total number was something like 72,800 roughly.
Mm. All right. Incredible. I won't editorialize this, but we'll leave it there. Thanks for that, Robert. All right, and then let's move on here. One of the big things that we've seen from the Trump administration are these attempts to cut federal budgets. That is frustrating a number of states because states are going to incur some of this spending that the federal budget is trying to cut out. And so we do have some states talking about budget shortfalls. What's the latest?
So the latest states to join, these other states talking about budget shortfalls is Maryland, Iowa, and West Virginia. And Maryland is especially going to take a hit because they have a significant population of federal employees. So it's not just the federal government spending cuts, but also layoffs that are going to hit their budget. And their credit rating was actually downgraded by Moody's earlier this year, like I think in April, from AAA to AA1, due to the potential impact of these layoffs on the state's budget. And so more of these state and local governments, they're anticipating taking on more entitlement spending while they're expecting tax revenues to decrease, especially those that have a significant population of federal employees or either now or soon to be former federal employees. And some of these other states we've talked about have already begun cutting healthcare and other entitlement subsidies. And I expect more states to follow. In this case, I think in these three states, they were able to make up these shortfalls at least this year by reaching into budget reserves. I think in Iowa's case, they had to take almost $1 billion from their state cash reserves to cover a $918 billion $918 million shortfall.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this is something that obviously is going to be a big deal for years to come. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And with that, we'll go ahead and get to your questions. Since the Strait of Hormuz is so narrow, couldn't Iran convert their S-300s or 400s into anti-ship weapons? Jared, I guess if they wanted to lose them, they could.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It might be technically feasible. You can make multi-purpose missiles, but there's no point for Iran to do that. They have a pretty significant battery of anti-ship missiles of all kinds. So, and like you mentioned, the Strait of Hormuz is not very wide. They basically all work all the way across it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Given the fragile ceasefire, do you think the Iranians will still attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz? Well, I was just looking at the ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz, looking at it this morning. I'll try to get that up on the screen, and we'll do a daily morning look at the strait over there. I mean, I guess it's still possible. I don't think it's likely at this point. I think China came out yesterday and they were pretty forceful. They said the strait needs to be open for commerce. This is something where Iran is going to incur additional U.S. military operations. If they do, it does not seem very likely to me at this point. Jared, do you have a differing view?
Nope. That perfectly summed it up.
Yeah, I don't expect that to happen. Now that Trump has pacified Iran, how quickly will he pivot back to China? Should we expect the same political strategy for China? Well, Jared, I guess we're going to keep some military assets hanging around in that region for a while, as it is a fragile ceasefire. But have you seen any attempts to repivot some of those assets back to the Indo-Pacific?
So the Gerald R. Ford got underway this morning, or maybe here in the next couple of hours, but it is getting underway today for deployment. It may end up taking the Vinson and the Nimitz spot just over in CENTCOM. That way, Vincent and Nimitz, which are both West Coast carriers, they can shift back to the Pacific. And I think what happened there is just all the East Coast carriers kind of got backlogged. So we sent some West Coast carriers out there to hold the fort until you could get back to the East Coast. Because for the past 2-ish years, it's been primarily East Coast carrier strike groups holding that spot, while the Pacific runs true Pacific deployments.
I see. All right. Any other questions?
Yep. One more.
Would this require local, I guess, talking about the special interest alien, actually, would this require local law enforcement to cooperate with encounter reporting? So I'm not sure the mechanics there, how local law enforcement would be able to determine if someone they encountered, say an illegal, was a special interest alien or not. I know like how we did it in Iraq and Afghanistan, running these guys across various watch lists. Robert, do you have any insight into how that would work?
As far as I think you're right. Local law enforcement is not going to have the knowledge to determine if somebody is a special interest alien when they run across them. But on the larger picture of immigration enforcement, this does require local law enforcement cooperation, and that's the major obstacle the Trump administration has been running into. That previous administrations, going all the way back to Eisenhower, have not had the same problem, where these sanctuary states, sanctuary cities have effectively blocked immigration enforcement, at least until this recent spate of very specified enforcement operations in cities, because the federal government just doesn't have enough personnel to blanket the entire country and effectively engage in widespread immigration enforcement, at least right now.
Mm-hmm. I imagine local law enforcement runs into the same problems. Even cooperative local law enforcement agencies run into the same problems that we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. You roll somebody up and this guy says, "Oh, my name's Mohammed." It's not like he has a driver's license or a birth certificate or any other identifying information. He says, "Oh, I'm Mohammed. I'm a poor dirt farmer." And come to find out, his name is not Mohammed. He's also not a poor dirt farmer. And if you are an illegal or a special interest alien, you can give whatever name you want. It's not like you have documents that prove your identity, or maybe you have, maybe you have a passport from a third-party country, which is not your real name, obviously. So I would say this is another big problem for any kind of enforcement operations against special interest aliens. Unless you have their biometric data or you have previous encounters, obviously if they give you one name during one encounter and give you a different name during another encounter, obviously there's going to be some dispute there and a big red flag. But there's no way for local law enforcement to really determine who these people are. So I imagine that will have to be done in conjunction with CBP or ICE. And so this bill, I just want to make it clear, this bill that's, I hope passes the House, is going to force local law enforcement agencies like Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office and the LAPD, force them to cooperate with CBP and ICE on special interest aliens.
I didn't see that in the bill. This is just for DHS. Yeah, that would be there. That would run into some constitutional issues just because the states have police powers, and that's where this fight over the sanctuary policies is at. Is that basically the states are saying this is our constitutional right to not allow you to deputize local law enforcement. And the federal government is saying that, or the Trump administration is saying that this is obstructing a federal authority to actually engage in immigration enforcement. And I think the documentation problem is a great point, because that's also true here, because there are states that allow illegal immigrants to get state IDs and state driver's licenses. And if they're coming here illegally and they don't have a passport or a birth certificate, they could just make up whatever name they want. So that's another major obstacle to actually doing especially for local law enforcement, to do anything with these special interest aliens, if they even know they encounter them, because they could have an identification that's not not even their real name or place of birth.
Right. All right. Thanks for the update, Robert. And we do have a couple other questions here. All right, Ben asks, now that we have a ceasefire in Iran, will the issue of sleeper cells in America go back to sleep, or is there enough impetus to find and root them out? Well, I imagine, the FBI said that they were increasing their surveillance of possible sleeper agents. My conclusion yesterday was that, is it feasible for Iran to have gotten Iranian agents into the United States under the Biden open border? Yes, it's feasible. Would it be appropriate for Iran to want to do that or to do that at all? Yes, it would. Would that be consistent with what we know about Iran in the past? Well, yes, Hezbollah has been operating inside the United States since at least the 1990s, maybe going back further than that. And then, is it timely? Why now? And yes, it would be timely for Iran to have done that. So, I go through that quick kind of, I don't know, heuristic or analytic tool, and I say, yeah, they're almost certainly here. As I said yesterday, I think this whole Iranian sleeper agent thing, I'm not saying it was blown out of proportion. It's obviously a big deal, but I think that's like a dead man's grenade. This is not Iran's primary use of force against the United States. That would be more, not necessarily as an insurance policy, but I would expect that they would not be used unless we're looking at regime change. So, being that we're still maybe looking at regime change, again, I think I'm above 50% likelihood on regime change in Iran, say in the next 12 months for sure. So, we'll see. I don't know if it'll go back to bed or not, but I don't expect like suicide bombers in the United States, for instance. Another thing too, we know some of these guys get over here and they're like, hey, actually, this place is not too bad. Like, maybe I probably don't want to blow myself up. This is not a bad gig I have over here. So, tough to say, but that's just my general conclusion. Jared or Robert, do you have a different take, or would you disagree?
No, I think the sleeper cell thing is probably being focused on a lot more than what I think the real threat is, which is what DHS said was the self-radicalized people that are going to independently activate. Because we've already seen that, that PSL member a couple months ago that assassinated those 2 Israeli embassy employees. That I think that's a much more likely threat than right now, at least, Iran activating sleeper cells.
All right. And if there's one other question here, perhaps we're working past the peak threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz, but does Iran need a navy to shut it down?
Yep.
So I guess they do have some options. They could mine it, but their boats would probably be blown up before they could get out there, I'm assuming.
I haven't seen that the mine countermeasure ships actually return to port. So they're there. They could just intercept them, and they know what they look like. They know who it is. So you just pick them up as the Iranians drop them. But beyond that, if you're going to shut down any waterway, you need a navy. The mines are there to further limit where ships can actually go safely. That way you have targeting if they don't comply. And also you can conduct much easier boarding operations if you really need to. You need a navy in order to shut down any waterway. The same way you need an army to shut down any passageway.
Mm-hmm. All right. Listen, this is the last point we'll make, and we'll wrap up the show. Just a quick reminder for all early warning subscribers, we're going to get you moved over to the new website starting later this week, and then we will be officially up and running at operating capacity next week, at least initial operating capacity. The last point I will make is yesterday I had a conversation with an interesting guy, someone who would know. He doesn't think this is over. And he said, basically give it a month. We'll see. Keep that in the back of your mind. With that, everyone, that's going to do it for today's morning briefing. We appreciate your support. Thank you for watching. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.